You know, some of the most genuinely terrifying stories from history aren't the ones you find in big, bold print in textbooks. Nope, they're kind of hidden in the margins, in the forgotten footnotes and misunderstood events. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on 4 of those stories, and trust me, each one is more shocking than the last. Okay, let's set the scene. It's April 14th, 1865. We're at Ford's Theater. And of course, we all know the main characters here. President Abraham Lincoln, and his assassin, John Wilkes Booth. It's one of those moments in history that everyone knows. But if you look at the paintings and drawings from that night, you'll see there are 2 other people in the presidential box. So who were they? Well, their names were Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. And for them, the horror of that night was really just the beginning. Yeah, that invitation they accepted to the theater wasn't just a ticket to see a play. It turned out to be a front row seat to a national catastrophe that would cast a dark shadow over the rest of their lives. A curse, really. So the second Booth fired that shot, Rathbone didn't even think. He just lunged at him. In the struggle, Booth slashed Rathbone's arm right down to the bone with a dagger. But even then, Rathbone managed to grab onto Booth's coat as he was trying to jump from the box. This actually threw Booth off balance, and it's why he broke his leg when he landed. Lincoln, of course, died 9 hours later, and while Rathbone's arm would eventually heal, his mind never did. And this quote right here, it just cuts right to the heart of it all. The physical wound healed up, sure, but his mind was absolutely shattered. He was just consumed by this incredible guilt, totally convinced that he should have saved the president. And that guilt, it just festered inside him for years. And the years that followed were just this slow, awful decline. He left the military, couldn't hold down a job. He got a government post in Germany, but even that didn't stop the downward spiral. And then, on December 23rd, 1883, that horror from Ford's Theater came full circle. In a fit of paranoid rage, he murdered Clara, the very woman who sat beside him at the play, and then he tried to take his own life. He survived, only to spend the next 28 years locked away in an asylum for the criminally insane. All right, next up, we've got a story that sounds like it was ripped straight from a horror novel. We're talking about America's first documented serial killer, H.H. Holmes, and his infamous, legendary murder castle. So the legend of H.H. Holmes and his business model is pure nightmare fuel. The story goes, he built this custom hotel specifically for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and he supposedly designed it with secret passages, gas lines piped directly into the rooms, trapdoors leading to a basement torture chamber. The whole shebang. The goal? Lure in rich guests, kill them, and then sell their bodies to medical schools. Not exactly a 5-star review on Yelp, right? So when he was finally caught, Holmes confessed to an absolutely staggering number of murders. Get this, over 200. But here's the thing. The number of murders that modern experts can actually truly confirm, it's 9. So what was really going on? Well, the whole murder castle idea was mostly just media sensationalism. The building's bizarre, confusing layout wasn't the work of some evil mastermind. It was just the result of a con man who kept firing his construction crews so he wouldn't have to pay them. But let's be very clear. The truth was still horrific. H.H. Holmes was a cold-blooded killer who murdered his business associate, Benjamin Pitezel, and even more chillingly, 3 of Pitezel's own young children. Okay, so we're going from the twisted mind of a single killer to the industrial-scale slaughter of World War I, and one of the most terrifying battles you've probably never heard of. This is the story of the 1915 defense of Auschwitz Fortress. See, to try and break the stalemate, the German army decided to unleash a horrifying new weapon, chlorine gas. The science here is just awful. When you breathe this stuff in, the gas mixes with the moisture in your lungs and turns into hydrochloric acid. It literally dissolves you from the inside out. So the Germans, completely confident that everyone would be dead, started advancing into this toxic green fog. They expected to find nothing but bodies. But what they saw instead was a living nightmare. The Russian soldiers, horribly burned, bleeding from their mouths, literally coughing up pieces of their own lungs, were charging directly at them. They just refused to die. I mean, can you even imagine the absolute shock of that moment? You're facing what looks like an army of the undead rising from the grave. The German troops completely panicked. They just turned and ran, so terrified that some of them even ran right into their own barbed wire. And that battle, it would go down in history as the Attack of the Dead Men. And now for our final story. It's a haunting mystery from late 19th century Paris, but it has a surprisingly intimate connection to millions of us all around the world today. So, back in the late 1880s, the body of a young woman, maybe only 16 years old, was pulled from the River Seine. There were no signs of violence, so her death was ruled a suicide. But a pathologist working at the morgue was just so captivated by her calm, peaceful, slightly smiling face that he made a plastered death mask of her. And pretty soon, copies of that mask became this morbidly popular piece of art in homes all across Paris. And her story really could have just ended there, a mysterious little footnote in Parisian history. But her face went on to become one of the most seen and one of the most touched faces of the entire 20th century. So, where have you seen her? Well, she is the face of Resuscitate Anne, the world's very first CPR training mannequin. Yeah. Since 1960, millions upon millions of people, all learning how to save lives, have practiced mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on a model of a dead girl who was pulled from a river over a century ago. She's even been called the most kissed girl in history. So, from a cursed guest at a national tragedy to the real story behind a killer's myth, to an army of the undead on a battlefield and a drowned girl whose face now helps save lives, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other unbelievable stories are hiding just beneath the surface of the history we think we know?